Hi, everyone. Welcome to Oregon Natural Desert Association's Dive into the Hive, Explore the World of High Desert Bees. Thanks for being here. I'm going to wait just a couple more minutes, maybe even 30 seconds, just to let everyone who's in the Zoom waiting room to come on in and enjoy this presentation. So thanks for your patience, and we'll get started in just another minute or so. Okay, let's get started. I see the numbers continuing to tick up, so thanks for joining us. But good evening, hello, welcome to Oregon Natural Desert Association's first event of our High Desert Speaker Series. This event is Dive into the Hive, Explore the World of High Desert Bees. My name is Claire Sikander. I am Oregon Natural Desert Association's Donor Relations Manager, and I'm also your host tonight. Before we get started, if you have any logistical or technology questions, please put them in the chat box, and my colleague Karina Diaz is behind the scenes and can help you there. If you have any questions for our speaker tonight, Lincoln Best, enter those in the Q&A box, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. I want to take a moment to thank First Interstate Bank for supporting high desert conservation and for sponsoring the entire speaker series, including the event tonight. Before we dive in, I want to give a land acknowledgement. So ONDA's work takes place on land that many Native peoples have called home and stewarded for thousands of years, including the Northern Paiute, Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs, Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla, the Burns Paiute, Fort McDermott Paiute, Klamath Tribes, Bannock Tribe, and Shoshone Tribe. And now a little bit about Oregon Natural Desert Association, also known as ONDA. We exist because we believe Oregon's high desert lands, waters, and wildlife need a voice for their protection. ONDA is a leader in conservation throughout the West and has helped protect landscapes across the high desert, including the Steens Mountain Wilderness and the Oregon Badlands Wilderness. ONDA's leadership has also enhanced the ecological health of Oregon's high desert through decades of fence removal, watershed restoration, and other stewardship efforts. ONDA is the organization getting this work done to conserve the high desert, and we hope you choose to join us by becoming a member tonight by donating. Our suggested membership donation is $25, but you can donate any amount to become an ONDA member. If you are already a member, show us your pride and commitment to conservation by making a special donation tonight. You can donate on our website, and yes, I see Karina just dropped the link in the chat. ONDA is committed to fostering equity and inclusion, and we welcome feedback at all of our events, including this one. If you want to share your thoughts with us, you can email us at onda@onda.org, or we're going to send out an anonymous survey form in a follow-up email after this event, and so you can drop your comments there as well. Okay, I am thrilled to introduce our speaker tonight, Lincoln Best. Hello, how's it going? Thanks for being here. Lincoln is a faculty research assistant at Oregon State University Cooperative Extension and works on the Master Melittologist Program and Oregon Bee Atlas. He also instructs the Oregon Native Bee School intermediate and advanced courses. And through my work organizing this event, I've already learned a little bit about native bees in the high desert, and I've seen some fantastic macro photography, and I am really excited for what Lincoln has to share with you all tonight. Okay, so with that, Lincoln, I'm going to turn things over to you and let you dive into your presentation. Thanks.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks to ONDA for having me. It's exciting to be able to talk about deserts because I love deserts so much. And you see my title slide?
Yes, I can see it.
Great. So let's get started. This evening, I'll be talking about our native bees, the Master Melittologist Program, the Oregon Bee Atlas, how they work together, and how they are teaching us an immense amount about our native flora and the interactions with our native bee fauna in Oregon. Throughout this presentation,
Oh no. Did you get disconnected?
yeah, I don't know. I'm still here.
Okay,
Uh,
let's try again.
Are we good?
We're good.
All
Go for
right.
it.
So moving on. So during the presentation, I'll put some questions out to the crowd. I know that there's a lot of OBA people here, so furiously put your answers in the chat and you can kind of test yourself as we go along. Right. So first I'll introduce our Master Melittologist program and the Oregon Bee Atlas data production framework. And then I will introduce a bunch of our desert bees, fuzzy, and cute little critters found in the eastern part of the state. So starting with the framework, several years ago, many people know that there was a significant bee kill in Wilsonville. That led to a lot of public advocacy, and the state passed a pollinator health bill, which led to the creation of a pollinator health extension specialist. That is our dear Professor Melathopoulos. And through his lab, he established all sorts of programming to help manage and conserve both managed pollinators, so honeybees and other managed pollinators, and of course all of the wild bees. And that became this educational program and the Atlas data production program. So this is the framework. We start with the training through the Master Melittologist program. We have data capture, data management, and data analysis. And through this framework, we have enabled the public to generate just huge volumes of data about our native flora and their interactions with native bees. So starting with the training and education and outreach components, we have developed this Master Melittologist program, which is a Master Gardener-like program, which is self-paced and stepwise. There are 6 modules in the apprentice level, and you can advance through the journey and master levels with a lot of dedicated study. And many people are learning now how much study it will take to actually become a master in the realm of bee biodiversity. Included in that is a lot of additional educational opportunities. We have 2 bee school courses every year. So these are laboratory courses where we teach everybody how to identify bees, as well as a field course that's hosted this June at the Siskiyou Field Institute. And where did it drop me?
Talking about the Bee Atlas. Maybe before? I don't think we saw this slide.
So I
Yeah.
started with the Master Melittologist program.
Yep.
It doesn't tell me when it's kicking me out, so I'm just going to roll with it. So the Master Melittologist program is a Master Gardener-like program that you proceed in a self-paced manner and stepwise through the apprentice, journey, and master levels. It takes a lot of study, but we provide a ton of educational opportunities. The apprentice level has 6 online modules that teaches you all the basics about bee biodiversity, but also how to take part in field collections to support the Oregon Bee Atlas. We have 3 courses annually, a field course that'll be held this June at the Siskiyou Field Institute, and 2 lab courses, which are intensive laboratory courses focused on microscopy, morphology, and
Lincoln, do you know what's going on? Anything we can do to help?
Host internet connection is unstable. So 1 second, I'm going to switch to I'm going to switch over to
Oh,
a spot because I think
okay.
my Wi-Fi is unhappy. So just give me a second.
Okay, great. We're gonna just stay tuned, everyone. Lincoln will be right back and we will continue to dive into the hive. I see some people are chatting us. Appreciate that. Thanks for your feedback. So give us another moment.
This looks like a better signal for me.
Okay, great.
Moving on. So we have 3 courses every year, a field course and 2 intensive lab courses where you learn how to identify all of our hundreds of different native bees. We've trained probably at this point a few hundred individuals, including lots of PIs, graduate students, members of the public, government scientists, and so on. For me, it's really rewarding because everyone is so passionate. Included in the education, of course, is we have developed new identification resources for bee genera, for bumblebee species. And these resources are making it easier for people to identify their bees by having all of these detailed illustrations and clear instructions. Some of our members are now even contributing to creating new identification keys. And we have a bunch of members currently finishing up keys to tiny little black sweat bees found all over the state. And we'll talk a little bit more of these little bees later on. In addition to that, as far as education goes, we host several different monthly online forums, usually with much better Wi-Fi quality than this. And in those, we have guest speakers and a lot of special education on various narrow topics. Moving on to data capture. Our process for the Oregon Bee Atlas goes something like this. You and your friends jump in a van, you head out into the desert, you find a patch of flowering plants that have obvious bee activity on them. You're going to create an observation for that plant on iNaturalist, and you're going to add it to our Oregon Bee Atlas sample project. The public can view the data in that project. It's pretty easy to find. And you're going to number which sample this is for the day. And you're going to fill in our second custom field, which you'll start with 0 bees. And once you've created this plant observation, you and your friends will lethally collect bee specimens that are visiting that flowering plant species. If you're David Jennings, who works with the Oregon Bee Atlas and the Washington Bee Atlas, as well as the Washington Native Bee Society, you and your friends will jump in your overlanding rigs and you'll drive out into the middle of nowhere that no one else goes, and you'll survey all of the desert flora, helping to fill in serious gaps in our maps. You know, huge parts of the state are really undersurveyed. They're vast, there's poor access, and we don't really know what's out there. You know, the biodiversity is so high that it takes a lot of survey effort in any of these places to find all of these, especially rare and specialized creatures out in the desert. So on David's journey, this was his collection in about a week-long trip. It's not a huge number of specimens, but he did find some real kind of desert rarities, and we'll take a look at those a little later on. Now, once you've made those samples, you're going to pin up your specimens. You're going to count them up. You're going to edit your iNaturalist observation so that the number of specimens is associated with that plant record. And once you do that, we have an automated process for downloading the iNat records and then generating a row of data for each bee that was collected, which is linked to the plant record. And with that, we automatically generate the entomological labels, the data labels that need to go on every single specimen. And if you take part in our Atlas programs, we mail those labels to your house. And that's a way for us to manage all of the data centrally, which ensures that it's standardized, it's very high quality. We can do all the management of that. And you have the convenience of just getting the data labels at your house. You cut them out obsessively like these ones, and then you have these perfect museum quality specimens. Now this map shows the accumulation of samples throughout the duration of our Atlas initiative to date. And so you will see pulses of sampling. This is 2018, then winter, then 2019 sampling season, then winter, then 2020, the pandemic season. You might be surprised, was a really active season. People wanted to get out into the wilderness. That's 2021, 2022, and then finally 2023. And if we take a look at the southeastern corner of the state, which makes up much of the high desert, we can see, let me just get my pointer working here. We can see that in Lake County, we have some solid sampling going on. We've had the O'Loughlin's out there, myself, August Jackson. I know Judy Maxwell. I think Lori Humphreys. The Petersons have certainly been out there a bunch. In the Steens and the Alvord area, we have an annual field trip, camping trip, that we go out there and do all sorts of sampling. The O'Loughlin brothers, of course, have been out in the Owyhees sampling for us several times. And then David Jennings' amazing overland trip was in the southeastern corner of the state, including, you know, the Idaho, Nevada, Oregon corner there. And despite this intensive sampling effort, we still find that there's these huge gaps. These are really difficult to fill. These are just huge sagebrush expanses. There's very few roads, and there's nothing really out there. And they're, you know, relatively long distances as well. So some of these spots are hard to get into. You know, it takes a lot of time, expense. But overall, we've documented 300 or 400 species of bees in the high desert, and we've made many new discoveries, some of which I'll talk about. And so here is a look down that state line in the southeast corner of the state from David's perspective on that trip, which was quite the adventure. And so you can see what it takes to get out there and do this kind of field work. It's not easy, it's not comfortable, but of course, that's what makes the stories worth telling. Now, if we just zoom out a little bit, we can see the contribution to the emerging Washington Bee Atlas project. They're doing a great job collecting data in Washington, and also the British Columbia Atlas Initiative has some great active participants in it. So if you're in those areas, please do support the Washington Native Bee Society and the Native Bee Society of British Columbia. They would love your membership, engagement, donations, and these small societies really benefit from even small contributions of time and effort. So moving on to data management, of course, if you're in our program and you're collecting bees out in the desert for us, you get to study them all winter, and then in the spring you turn them in and you contribute them to the Atlas, and they come to me, and I work in the situation room where we have an endless number of boxes full of bee biodiversity from around the state. And then it's my job to put names on all of those many tens of thousands and now hundreds of thousands of museum quality specimens. Let's take a bit of a deep dive into some of the data that's being produced through the Atlas. So as I mentioned, our plant data is stored in iNaturalist. There's now more than 25,000 individual samples. So a sample of bees from one plant makes up an observation. And this view ranks those plant sampling events. They're ranked by how many samples have been taken from each plant. So each one of the observations, if you see that Sidalcia oregona has 50 observations, that's 50 samples from around the distribution of that plant. And each sample ends up representing usually around 7 bee specimens on average. So even for Fragaria virginiana there with 30 observations, we have in our lab about 200 native bees collected from that particular wild strawberry. And let's take a little bit deeper dive into one plant in particular. So this project has surveyed now more than 1,550 species of flowering plants in the state. That's a lot. I really love penstemons, so this is the example of just the penstemon survey data. We're now at around 600 samples from penstemons around the state, so you can see in that map the distribution of penstemon samples just in the high desert alone is pretty good. But of course, we're not just sampling penstemons. There are 35 or more species of penstemons in Oregon that have been sampled, many of which have several samples at least, meaning that for these 35 species of penstemons, we have usually between 700 and 400 individual bees associated with each species. And bees don't like all penstemons equally. And some bees only really like one kind of penstemon. So if we take a look at the data for Penstemon dustus, the hot rock penstemon, we see that some of those do occur in the high desert. This is a small, pale colored penstemon that likes really hot, dry spots. And we have a couple different species of native bees, in particular Atoposmia genus, which likely only visit this penstemon or perhaps a couple additional species that are closely related. Now, when it comes to data analysis, we're busy working on this. So as you might get the sense, a lot of what we're documenting are these interactions between the bees and the plants. So in this figure, we have 4 different plant species. I think we have 11 different bee species, but we have 23 interactions documented between and among them. And so that we see that the blue flower is visited by many different bees, but the yellow flower is only visited by one bee. The red bee visits 3 different flowers, but the royal blue bee only visits the orange flower. And so these interactions tell us a lot about which bees visit each flower and which flowers each bee visits. And it can help tell us about the specialization among these bees. So the Oregon Bee Atlas, as of 2023, had generated around 50,000 of these interactions. So the plants are listed on the top, the bees are listed on the bottom, and the thickness of the lines represent the number of times these different interactions have been recorded. And this graphic is so big, I have to split it into 2. So here's the other 25,000 interactions. The thing to really take away from this is that each thin line, each single interaction requires someone to climb up on a mountain or drive out into the high desert, observe a native flowering plant, and then document those bees visiting it. And so this volume of science can only be conducted by a community of individuals. And that's what we've been able to cultivate through the generosity of passionate Oregonians. And they are an amazing group. So here is a subset of data specifically from the Steens. The bees are on the bottom and they're color-coded by family. So here there are 5 families of bees represented. There are only 6 families of bees in Oregon. And along the top are the plant genera that these bees have been documented visiting. So if we look here, and here's one of your little quizzes, there's all these interactions recorded for a Cirsium, and this is the endemic Cirsium on top of the Steen. So if you know what it is, stick it in the chat. And we can see that these ones are all visited by the blue bees, and then there's only a few additional records of bees visiting Cirsium. Now, what we find is that almost all of that visitation is by bumblebees. And so this is Cirsium peckii, an endemic thistle to a few different mountain ranges in that area. And almost all of the visitation to that thistle is bumblebees. So that tells us a lot. Another example here is Stephanomeria. If you know the common name of this flowering plant, stick it in the chat. And what we find is that almost all of the visitation to Stephanomeria in the Steens, as far as we've documented, is this genus Ashmediella. And Ashmediella are really small, funky little leafcutter bees. And so even a modest amount of data, this is several hundred interactions, it can tell us a lot about the local plant communities and the bee biodiversity, their interactions, and who's dependent on who. So moving on with our data analysis, we have a pretty large-scale DNA barcoding project going on. We do that with the Center of Biodiversity Genomics at the University of Guelph in Canada. And the benefit of this is that we're able to match the males and females of poorly known species, and we're able then to differentiate those from closely related species, which may look almost identical. So here's 95 specimens, specially selected for DNA barcoding. We put a leg each in the 96 well plate. We take a picture of each specimen. We create way too many spreadsheets about all the data associated with these things. And after several weeks, the Center for Biodiversity Genomics loads the sequences up into an online platform that has all these analytical tools built in. And then I can create a neighbor joining tree that helps visualize the relationships among and between these species. And so the way to read this tree is that the horizontal groups represent multiple individuals in one species, and the long branches represents the difference between two species. So here is one group, and then circled is a second group of individuals in one species. All of these red ones are the genus Lasioglossum. They're very hard to identify. We expect that there are many new records and many new species in the state, and so we've put in a lot of effort DNA barcoding those ones. And about 100 of our members as of last year had contributed specimens from their adventures that ended up getting DNA sequenced. Those photos add up, and it helps give, I think this video helps give an impression of all of the different appearances of our bee fauna. So in that tree, there was only about 700 individual bees representing just over 300 species. And so looking at those, we see, oh, wow, you know, bees are small and often darkly colored. But when we can just look at a huge montage of them, we see that they come in every color, neon blue and purple, red and yellow and striped and tattooed and fuzzy and fat and skinny and long. And this really only represents, you know, 20 or 25% of our fauna. And so hopefully that really impresses, you know, how great the biodiversity of bees is in the state, and especially in the high desert where we have so much to learn. Now, focusing on those little black sweat bees, the Lasioglossum, we're lucky to work with retired U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service biologist Joe Engler, who has spent a lot of time with myself working on the Lasioglossum and some of our other members. We've DNA barcoded many hundreds of them, and we will likely find more than 100 species in the one genus eventually. There are numerous new state records. Many of them are in the desert, and also there are new species that Joe is finding. And a couple of the exciting ones are also from around Burns, especially from Dave's house, one of our famous collection localities. So that DNA barcoding effort and some historical review has ended up in what I call the alphabet of Lasioglossum species. You know, there are a couple letters missing, but you get the idea that even for this one genus, the biodiversity is just incredible, and it takes a huge amount of field work, lab work, and genetic sequencing to be able to differentiate all these things and put them on a map. So this is a short animation showing different Lasioglossum species and their distributions. And what I want you to take away is just that for each species, you can often see really distinct trends in their distribution. That one, last one was like east side, and then we got one that's like just in the Willamette. And as this comes to an end, we see right here a few that are just out in the high desert. And it looks like Joe thinks now that this Lasioglossum unknown species 2 out in the desert is a undescribed species. We've been really fortunate to get a lot of additional support from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And right now we're working on a modest grant to generate bumblebee data for the high desert because we have some desert bumblebees, as well as to produce additional barcodes for the desert. And we have completed most of that. So in our tree, we saw about 700 individual sequences. We're now at about 2,500. Probably we have more than 600 species sequenced for the state. And probably half of those are species from the high desert, which is really awesome. The last part of our analytical campaign really is to get an online atlas where people can explore the raw data by species, by bee species, by plant species, and then be able to project it on a map. And the real dream is that we'll also have automated reporting. So this is a very simple, automatic 2-page report that we're generating for some vineyards that are working with us. But ultimately, I have a vision of being able to just press button a report that'll generate a 400-page report that'll have both simple recommendations digested from our massive data set, as well as species lists and distributions and phenologies and floral relations for all the species of your area of interest. That could be the desert, but it might also be a state park. And so that kind of wraps the framework from education to field work to the data production and analysis. And so let's take a look at some of these cool high desert bees. So I'm going to show some bees, and then I will tell you what they are at the end. So as soon as I put up the new bee, I want some of you to try and guess what they are in the comments, in the chat, because I know some of you will recognize these, and they're, most of them are really funky bees. So this is a bee. There's 2 species in the state. They're both only known from the high desert. This one is only known from one patch of gumweed in Lake County, and a couple Atlas members have been fortunate to visit it. These little cuties are about 6 millimeters long. They have green-blue eyes. They look ridiculous. The tongue is almost as long as the body. But when you're that small, you need a really long tongue to be able to nectar on a lot of different composite asters. And they have, even in the females, I think they have a bit of a yellow tattoo on their lip. You can see the pollen collecting hairs here on the hind leg. And we have a few images contributed by the Petersons. This is the female of Anthoferula cyanura. And that's the one known from only one population. And you can see those fuzzy hind legs, specially adapted to carry Grindelia or gumweed pollen. And the males are always a little bit goofy looking. He's got that big yellow tattoo on his face. And so, yes, you were right. It's a Anthoferula. And again, these are rare, poorly known, but likely more widely distributed than we know out in the high desert. So if you think you might know what these critters are with a little unicorn on their nose, stick it in the chat. We have a handful of species in the subgenus. This one in particular has red markings on the abdomen, but also red eyes. Amazing. Some of you might notice that omolar angle on the mesepisternum. And so most of these bees, of course, out in the desert are floral specialists as well. So I think this is a native salvia. I don't think this is one that occurs in the state. We do have one that's moderately abundant, Salvia dorii. That's a great target if you're looking to document some new bees for the state because it's still undersurveyed. And so you can see this little unicorn here on its nose. And this is kind of characteristic for the subgenus, Ashmediella aerogokyla. Most of these species are specialized on little fabaceae, so small pea-flowered plants, and where I just assume those little contraptions on their face are used to help get them into the flower. I'm not sure what the function is for visiting salvia, but that is Ashmediella aerogokyla subgenus. All of the species have weird modifications of their front lip to help them interact with the flowers that they're specialists at visiting. Here's another one. This bee is known from Oregon from only a single specimen. It came out of a trap far out in the desert that was placed out there by the O'Loughlin brothers on one of their many wild missions, one of the special ops. And so this is a bee that specialized moderately tightly with desert dandelions, Malacothrix. Probably didn't say that right, but that's all right. These bees have yellow tattoos, pale tattoos on their abdomen. The males have a bunch of facial tattoos and markings on their legs. And you can find these probably visiting a few other aster genera as well out in the high desert. And again, we have a single specimen. This is Calliopsis puellae. Blue eyes, yellow tattoos on its body. Amazing critters. This is just a huge load of aster pollen. So that's Calliopsis puellae. Amazing. This one's a bit of a plain Jane in the female. So you could probably get some of you will get the genus, but I doubt any of you will get the species until we see the male, which is a big clue. This is a summer digger bee. They have very long tongues. They fly around like bumblebees, but they don't have the bumblebee-like pollen basket. They have hairy hind legs. And so that's one way to help distinguish it from a bumblebee. They have green eyes. Here's the male. So some of you are probably figuring this out pretty quick right now, I bet. And what's amazing about these males is that they have a red vest. They have yellow tattoos all over their face, including on their mandible. Their tooth has yellow tattoo. They have green eyes. But even more significantly, they have these black flags on their middle wrist. And so we have had a single specimen of this species collected by the Petersons. I think that was Pete's catch. And this is his photo. And so you can see here that on the mid leg, there's this incredible black flag on each wrist. How is this a critter? These are out in the high desert. And look how long its tongue is for nectaring in some of those deep corollid flowers. Super cool. These are just amazing. I've never seen one of these. So that's Anthophora crotchii. I know right now everyone's thinking, oh man, who's that named after? So this bee was named after Robert Crotch, who was a British entomologist who came to North America. And he came straight to the west and he made it up into British Columbia and he did all sorts of amazing surveys. But he succumbed to tuberculosis at the age of 32, which means in this photo, he must be less than 32. So not an easy life being a 19th century explorer and naturalist, but very cool. So again, if you think you know what this is, stick it in the chat, see if you can get your ID confirmed. One of the giveaways is just the size of the pollen. And so this genus of bees, there's many species, and the vast majority of them are specialized on two groups of plants that have giant pollen. They nest in the ground. They're often called turret bees because they build these little chimneys either out of the ground horizontally or out of vertical faces of like kind of sedimentary cut banks. So I think the background might start giving it away. But you can find giant pollen in the mallows and in the cacti. And so this is Opuntia, and the bee is Diadasia australis, a cactus specialist bee found out in the high desert. Now, the high desert in Oregon is not well known. 4 cacti. They are out there, but we don't have a really strong cactus fauna. But we still do have these kind of, I always consider them to be exotic cactus specialist bees. So Diadasia australis. This is one that people might pick up on pretty quick. It has opalescent banding on the abdomen. In their native range, they nest in native alkali habitats. And so, of course, the high desert is full of little alkali ephemeral pools and lakes. And this bee, Nomia melanderi, has been developed into a commercial pollinator to produce alfalfa seed. And so in certain parts of around Pendleton and Walla Walla, we have millions of these. But out in the wild, there's almost none left. The USDA in Logan, Utah has been looking for wild populations of this bee. They know of one population in Utah. And through our Oregon Bee Atlas effort, the O'Loughlin brothers found a single specimen in the Alvord Desert, which means that there must be a population there. And another member of ours, Landauer, found 2 specimens in the far south Klamath region. And so there's 3 populations, wild populations of this species known to exist, which is kind of shocking given that it's been adopted as a commercial pollinator. And for those commercial beds to persist, we need that genetic variability that's harbored in the wild populations. And so there is an effort to track down more populations of Nomia melanderi, the alkali bee. This little bee is about 3 or 4 millimeters long. If you're out looking for them in the desert, you can't actually even look for the bee. You have to look for its shadow flitting along the sand of the desert floor. That's how small and invisible this thing is. This is the cuckoo of fairy bees. We have about 24 species of fairy bees in the state. They're all floral specialists, and this is the cuckoo bee that sneaks into the fairy bee's nest. And this bee was first discovered in Oregon at Dave's house near Burns by the O'Loughlin brothers in part of their special operations. So Neolera is the fairy cuckoo bee. So small. We have a couple additional discoveries from the past 2 years. One is this blurry thing. This is Pseudopenergus, another aster specialist. There's one population of these known in Baker County and a population known from the Klamath. And I knew that this bee also had a cuckoo bee. And so I sent the O'Loughlin brothers back to look for the cuckoo. And sure enough, they found it. And so this bee is called Pseudopenergus, and the name is now changed to Protandrina. And the cuckoo of that bee that the O'Loughlins were able to find at the one population of the host, this bee is Holcopasides. So another bee, it's like very camouflage looking. You can see how it tucks its wings kind of under its back, and that's because it has a lot of fossorial behaviors where it just crawls around on the ground looking for the nests of its host. And so that bee is Holcopasides. Finally, if we all remember Dave Jennings' epic overland trek through the southeastern corner of the state, he came back with a couple really cool discoveries. Most of them were all sunflower specialists. He found Svastra, which is a giant desert longhorn bee specialized on sunflower. He found a melidid family bee, Hesperapus carinata, which is also a sunflower specialist. And he found this bee, which is one of my favorites because it just has the most face tattoos of a lot of our fauna. And put it in the chat quick. And so this bee is it's a native mining bee in the subgenus Calandrina. And these Calandrina are all aster specialists. They come out late in the season. And the females are cool because they also have these face tattoos. So this is the face of the female. And you can see here these 2 paraocular maculations, yellow maculations here. So very cool discovery made by David on his journey. And he's collected all 4 specimens that we have for this subgenus and the only Hesperapus that have been collected through the atlas as well. So those huge efforts to get out into the middle of nowhere are well rewarded with these really cool discoveries. Now, if you're really keen on this kind of project and work, as I mentioned, the Oregon Bee Atlas is a community science initiative. Anyone can join the Master Melittologist program, learn about bee biodiversity, and take part in generating this immense amount of interaction data, which is, as you can see, all of our participants here, they're very proud of their accomplishments. You can go to our Master Melittologist webpage at OSU. We're really easy to find, as long as you can spell melittologist. We welcome all sorts of membership, volunteers, donations, of course. But a big development for us has been the release of the Pollinator Paradise license plate in Oregon. Some of the proceeds of this novelty plate go to support this research specifically. So it costs $40 for the additional registration on this plate every 2 years, and we get a part of that. And this is really going to help make this research program and educational program sustainable over the long haul. I'd like to thank all of our contributing organizations, especially the Jerry and Judith Paul Native Pollinator Fund. Jerry and Judith have been critical in helping develop this program and make it sustainable. And thank you to all of the other donors to our endowment fund. Thank you to our academic and government research funding partners, and to our corporate donors, Northwest Natural, Straightaway Cocktails, and others. Of course, we can't do this without that kind of support. So with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Claire.
Great. Thank you so much, Lincoln. That was super interesting. I learned a lot. I took a bunch of notes and then just realized it's a lot of bee species that I want to go see myself. Just a long list. A lot of things I can't pronounce either, but that are super cool. And I'm excited to rewatch this lecture tomorrow. I saw some questions in the chat, so just to address that quickly, we are going to send a recording out of this presentation tomorrow in a follow-up email. Okay, now I want to move to some Q&A for Lincoln. So put your questions in the Q&A box and we'll get to them. And Lincoln, to start, someone had a question about melittologist. Can you define that term?
Yeah, that's a key word for this presentation, isn't it? So melittology is the study of bee biodiversity, and that's in contrast to apidology or apiculture, which is the study of honeybees. And so it's a way for us to differentiate the study of managed pollinators from all of the rest of bee biodiversity. And in a lot of languages, Melita, Melissodes, Melissa, even honey, miel, miet, all these words just mean bee.
Great, interesting. Well, speaking of honeybees, someone asked, are there any honeybees in the high desert?
That's a great question. I expect that there are a lot of honeybees late in the season. So rabbit brush is a huge flowering resource late in the season, especially when there's not a lot of other options. There is, I don't know how many square miles of rabbit brush on the east side of the Cascades, but it's a huge amount, and it's just a massive resource pulse of nectar and pollen. As we've learned in some recent research, aster pollen in particular can be really good for bees and improving their gut health. And so I don't manage honeybees myself, but I'm sure late in the season, I bet a lot of honeybee people are taking their apiaries out into the desert for that purpose. When I have been out there, I don't see a ton of bees or a ton of apiaries, but depending on the region, especially closer to major population centers, you might find more of that.
Got it. Cool. Thanks. Another question. So, let's see. So, I have a question about, do bees nest in the ground? And I know you briefly mentioned that during the Diadacia australis
You got it.
section. Okay,
Yeah.
sweet.
Cactus bee. Yeah, you got it. So the vast majority of our native bee species do nest in the ground. Even a lot of our what we consider to be cavity nesters, leafcutter bees and mason bees and other traditionally considered to be cavity nesting bees, even a lot of those bees will nest in the ground. They're opportunistic in a lot of cases. What we find in landscapes where there are not a lot of trees or woody shrubs, so where there would be a lot of natural cavities, we find that the bee fauna is skewed towards bees that are ground nesting. But overall, looking either at North American or global bee fauna, we're looking at 70% plus percent of bees are ground nesting. And those nests are quite simple. So as you saw that little bee sticking its head out of its hole, you know, Diadacia have been documented digging holes down into the desert in southwestern US that are like many meters deep, like deeper than you can
Wow.
dig without worrying about your crater caving in on you. So they, sometimes they do kind of have extreme depth to their nests, but in general, the nests are very simple. There's a single entrance. They may be branching, but because these species are mostly solitary, the general architecture is pretty simple.
Okay, meters deep is wild. That is very
Yeah, like
cool.
4 meters deep, like very
Wow.
deep. Yeah, 12 feet.
Amazing. Yeah, amazing. Okay, next question. Um, okay, you mentioned other bee pollinators aside from European honeybee that are currently domesticated. You mentioned one in particular, but could you elaborate on what the other species are and how widespread is their use?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, of course, we all know about honeybees, Apis mellifera, but we have some alternative managed pollinators that are solitary bees. So we have mason bees, primarily Osmia lignaria, so the blue orchard mason bee. It's used in orchard pollination. And we have leafcutter bees, in particular Megachile rotundata, which is actually a European species. And it's used in the pollination of alfalfa for seed. That's used pretty commonly. And then, of course, we have the Nomia melanderi as well, the alkali bee, which is used in alfalfa seed production. Those are the three primary non-apis managed pollinators. The production for those, the mason bees and the leafcutter bees, I think you're looking in the realm of like 5 to 50 million per year, I think is kind of the scale of the commercial supply. So there you go.
Okay, great. Another question we have. So, what are some clues to look for out in the desert for ground nesting bees? And what's the typical range of a bee from their nest?
That's a good question. So a bee's range is closely related to its size. So our fairy bees are tiny. Their nests are usually right underneath whatever their favorite flower is. Like, within 10 feet for sure. Just super close. They're specialized at collecting the pollen from one particular kind of plant, and they can just fly from their nest. If you're this big, you don't want to fly that far. And so they'll fly right up into their thing and then go back. And it's a really short trip. A good example of a large bee that disperses long distance is the bee that was my title slide. That's Bombus morrisoni, Morrison's bumblebee. The queens of Morrison's bumblebee are gigantic. They're like this big. And the reason for that is, and we do find that other desert loving bumblebees have giant queens. The reason is that in the fall, when the new queens emerge, they need the ability to disperse long distance in the desert to find flowering resources so they can fatten up for the winter. And when those foundress queens emerge in the spring, again, they need the ability to disperse really long distances to find spring forage, so that they can get a colony established. And so those desert queen bumblebees are often gigantic. The Nevada bumblebee, the white-shouldered bumblebee, the Bombus fervidus, I think the great golden bumblebee, and some others. The queens are huge.
Wow, that is a massive bee. I can't even imagine. Your
Right.
thumb? Wow. Okay, another question. Let's see. What are the best months for participating in bee survey projects? And kind of related to that, also, is there best time of year to see native bees in the high desert?
Sure. That's a great question. So we're really lucky in Oregon that we have such a diversity of ecosystem types, of precipitation regimes, of topography. And so bees come out in the Dalles, as Scott Sublette knows, probably next week, almost 12 months of the year. But really, by late March, as soon as it starts to warm up, all this incredible diversity of spring specialist bees comes out. And so the bee season in Oregon really is like great from March to October. It's great. And so whether you're on the coast, there's sand dune bees, whether you're, say, in the high alpine in July, in the Wallowas, um, and all sorts of different places in between. There are places every month of the year where there's like really great opportunities to observe our native flora and the native bees that are associated with that flora. For the high desert in particular, I honestly haven't been able to spend entire field seasons out there, but I can tell you May, June, so long as you're about 3 weeks plus after the snow melts, because last year we had a heavy snowpack, if you recall. And then as you go up in elevation through the summer into the Steens, our annual trip is usually, I think, the end of July. And, the top of the Steens at the end of July is just magnificent. But of course, if you want to be in the Alvord, you might want to be there in May, where there's still some moisture in the soil, and some of that mid-spring flora is still blooming, because for a good chunk of the summer, there's not a lot in bloom in the Alvord, maybe aside from the weedy sunflowers, some of the blazing star, the mint zelia, and a few other things. But if you want to get some of the other really cool desert flowers that you might find in the Alvord, you might want to go a little bit earlier than late summer. So there's always great opportunities out there. We have a lot of field trips, day trips, day training events, camping trips. We usually spend about a week down in the Siskiyous in July for the Franklin's Bumblebee Hunt with the Fish and Wildlife Service. And so we do all sorts of cool trips throughout the year. Cottonwood Canyon is a much loved trip in September to collect off rabbit brush and snakeweed.
Great, thanks. I have so many good questions coming in, but I'm looking at the time and I'm going to ask you one more before we wrap up. Let's see. Let's talk about the specifics of what the native bees eat. Are they eating the nectar and the pollen? Just the pollen? What are they consuming?
So that's a good question. So nectar is a carbohydrate primarily. So that's, nectar is sugar. And so that gives the bees glucose to be able to fly around and be active. So both male and female bees will nectar in order to kind of gas up. And then both male and female bees will eat some pollen as adults as well. Usually not a ton, but some. And then, of course, the female bees spend much of their life just foraging and collecting both pollen and nectar to feed to their brood. As a generalization, our solitary native bees collect up a bunch of pollen, they mix in a bit of nectar, and they create a pollen ball. They place, they put the pollen ball in a brood cell, usually underground, as we know, and then they lay an egg on it. And that pollen ball represents all of the resources necessary for that egg and then that bee larva to basically go through its entire lifespan and metamorphose into another adult. So one thing I find really fascinating is that so many of our native bees are specialized on one or a few different flowers. So their gut physiology is specially adapted to digest all of the proteins and amino acids in that pollen from their preferred plant and then generate a whole new bee from just the pollen and nectar from one floral resource. To me, that's just amazing.
Wow, what a fun fact to end on. That is really cool. Thanks for sharing. Thank you everyone for your questions as well. If it wasn't answered tonight, stay tuned for the follow-up email. We're going to send out a recording to this event tomorrow and then also link to some resources that were mentioned here tonight. Before we go, Lincoln, just want to thank you, appreciate you for sharing your time with us and sharing your knowledge with us. I know that you've inspired me to pay more attention to these tiny and vital pollinators out in the high desert. So thank you so much for that. And I want to mention that our High Desert Speaker Series continues. We have another online event. This one's all about the Oahe Canyonlands. And then we have other in-person events in Portland and Bend. So you can find more information on our website, onda.org. And then finally, thank you to everyone who's listening. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being here tonight and being part of the Oregon Natural Desert Association community. Our work is not possible without our members, so we invite you to become a member today or continue your support of high desert conservation by making a donation of any amount. You can join us at onda.org/donate. Thanks. The link's in the chat. Perfect. Everyone, thank you so much. Thanks again, Lincoln, and have a great evening, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.